Hi, I'm Ptolemy and in October 2024 I decided to try and make a stop motion film all by myself. About 15 months later, it was called The Overseers and it was finished. Here is how the whole thing went. I came up with the concept for this film about 2 years ago. I really wanted to make an exploration of a fantasy world, similarly to how Mad God by Phil Tippett is structured, but with a distinctly more sci-fi fantasy kind of approach. I played around with a couple of ideas, and for a while it was actually going to be about this brain god floating in the sky and controlling the planet, but over time it kind of evolved to become this story surrounding a pink music box. There's actually a book in Australia called The Key to Rondo, which is about a world trapped inside a music box, and I wasn't consciously thinking about it when I came up with the idea for the film, but it must have been in the back of my mind, because it's a pretty similar idea. Animating a scene in stop motion is usually a pretty straightforward process. You kind of start with a few sketches or ideas for characters or sets, and then depending on how complicated they are, sometimes I'll go into Blender to make a 3D representation of what the whole thing could look like. From that point, you usually go to making a ball and socket armature. It's kind of a mix between making sure the character is big enough to have all the articulation that you want, but also making sure it's not too big so that you don't cause any issues when you're making the set. It's not like digital animation where you don't have to worry about any of those things, because with stop motion there's all these physical limitations with the materials, with the space you have provided, how much light you have, where the camera can fit. There's all these little things that affect your decisions, but that's kind of partly why it's so cool. Then, depending on the character, you sculpt the more detailed parts so you can then put it in plaster and make a mold. All of the characters in the Overseers are made using rubber latex, which is really easy to pour into molds and it holds its shape really well. If it's a character that doesn't need any kind of complicated mold, then you can just go straight to using foam to sketch out the form of the character. Even though it's not recommended by most fabricators, I personally just like to paint the tinted latex straight onto the foam bodies and do a few layers of that until I have it looking how I want. For characters like the weird white creatures in the Overseers, I would pour latex and then let it partially set before using it, so then I could apply it to the skin and I could kind of sculpt it in 3D. After all that, it's basically just painting the characters, adding all the extra stuff like fur, all the stuff that makes the character just feel alive. My initial concept for the white tarred creatures was a lot more humanoid than they ended up being, but once I started making one of them, I really wasn't liking it, so I ripped it apart and I threw all the parts on the desk and just walked away. But when I came back a few hours later, the parts had kind of fallen in a way that looked like this three-limbed creature, and I really liked that idea, so I drew a couple sketches and I ended up using it for one of the designs. Building sets was something that I wasn't too familiar with before this film. I'd done a few cool things for previous films like a balsa wood house, and I'd made various alleyways and stuff out of foam core, but in terms of big mountainous things like that, I had never done anything. For the first scene I filmed, which was the lizard fight with the eyeballs, I knew I wanted this cave, but I had no idea how to do it, so I ended up making this really janky thing out of chicken wire and paper mache, and it looked good, but it wasn't really the right way to do it. So for the next scene, I found this plaster bandage, which is mod rock, and for the rest of the film I just used that because it's really easy to use. You just make a structure and then you drape it over, and it basically creates all the detail for you and you gotta do basically nothing. Another thing that I wasn't too sure how to do was making the spaceships. I spent like a week just drawing ideas, but they were all looking too futuristic, so after a while I ended up picking up a Eagle 4, which is a Space 1999 model kit, and my plan was to kit bash it with a few pieces of plywood and some foam to make this space station and the spaceship. And after I decided to go for more of the Star Wars aesthetic of everything being a bit old and rusted, the ship started to really look good. The space station design was basically just ripped from 2001: A Space Odyssey and just made a bit simpler, but it only shows up for such a small part of the film that I didn't really mind. To film the spaceships, I set up a blue screen and then I made this really fucked up janky slider system with a few pieces of wood and some clamps, which worked pretty well. I just slid the camera towards the ship instead of moving the ship, which made it look like it was moving through space even though the ship was actually just stationary. And then for the space station, I would just put it in front of either a black or a red background depending on the scene, and I would just get underneath it and spin it as slowly as I could, but it looked alright. I actually wouldn't consider myself a very good animator. I kind of just get around the hard stuff by using a right sequence and framing the stuff out that I don't really want to animate. It's actually kind of annoying because my studio is basically a converted bedroom, which means there's some pretty thick carpet on the floor, so using a tripod becomes really hard because it moves around between frames and shakes the camera. So most of the film I had to have the camera upside down underneath the tripod, and I'd have to put the tripod on my animation desk, which means the camera wouldn't move around, but it does mean that I'd have to kind of lean around the tripods to get to the characters to animate them, which made it even harder. Around early 2025, I bought my dream camera, which is a Krasnogorsk 3, which is a 70s, 80s Soviet Union 16mm film camera, and I thought it would be a really cool idea to try and use it to animate a scene. So I got the film roll, I put it in, and then I set everything up ready, but I was doing this at the same time as GCSEs, which, if you don't know, is like the final compulsory academic tests in England, because I'm only like 16, 17 years old. So I was doing all these tests for subjects I knew basically nothing about, whilst I had this ticking time bomb of a camera, because film gets destroyed really easily, so you've got to kind of use it as quickly as you can. So there were some days where I was animating 10 hours straight to try and get this thing finished as quick as I could. So then, you know, I took it off to get developed and scanned, and then it came back about a month later, but the whole thing was unusable because I think there was something wrong with the gate in the camera, and the film was actually moving as it was taking each frame, so all the footage is completely motion blurred and useless. By that point, I'd already destroyed the set and everything, and I'd moved on. But luckily, before I started filming with the film camera, I'd done a few tests with my DSLR to make sure I had the motion right. So I was able to kind of Frankenstein this scene back together using the footage from my DSLR that I didn't intend to use before. So I see heaps of issues with that scene. I think it's really janky, but hopefully it's not too obvious. I think the editing kind of works. Luckily, I was doing lots of the visual effects in the film as I went, so when I finished filming, I didn't have to do all of it at once, but I did have to do all of the music, including 2 full songs for the radio scenes. So I used some placeholder music for a while, and I worked out that Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits and 3 Little Birds by Bob Marley were the 2 perfect songs. So I started by kind of recording covers of them, which then kind of evolved into their own thing, which sound not too great, but once you put the radio effects on, it kind of sounds crunchy anyway, so I think it works alright. The sounds for lots of the creatures in the film were actually taken from my dog Wilf, because he would always make these really strange sounds when he was eating. But towards the end of the film, he unfortunately passed away. He actually died on my birthday, which is quite strange, which put me in a hard position because I didn't have enough audio to finish the rest of the characters' voices. But things like the lizard, which I wanted to use his voice for, I didn't have enough recordings, so I ended up using lion roars and other various animals, which I personally don't think sounds as good, but hopefully it doesn't feel too out of place with the rest of the film. When I finished the film, I started sending it off to different animators and directors who inspired me, and I got some pretty good reception, which is cool, but as I'm recording this, the film's not actually out to the public, so I've got no idea what everyone actually thinks of it. I'd like to finish with some special thank yous. Number 1 to Phil Tippett for being my mentor and answering all of my questions over the last 2 years or so. And then thanks to everyone in my life who's had to put up with me talking about this film non-stop for the last year and a half. Also, thanks to the people that watch my videos on the MPT channel where I make parody animations. This whole film was funded from revenue from that channel alone. So you guys watching those stupid South Park parodies actually paid off. Well, thanks for watching the film and thanks for watching this. If you want to get in contact with me for anything, my email is PTOLEMYTORNEY@outlook.com. You can see it on screen now. And hopefully in the future, I'll have another film to share with you guys.